Dear panelists and participants, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. I am David Bakala, Regional Vice President for Africa for Internet Society, and I have the great pleasure and privilege to moderate this session entitled Internet Connectivity, Achievements to Date, Challenges and Opportunities Ahead, co-organized by Internet Society and Association for Progressive Communications, or APC. The rapporteur is Carlos Rey Monero from our partner organization APC. And we also have my colleague David Fauci, who is assisting me in the moderation and the chat. Connecting the unconnected has been one of the most, if not the most important policy issue around the internet ever since the internet has become the global network of networks that we know today. I remember that when we had the first submarine cables reaching the coast of Africa, we thought that connectivity will be less of an issue in the future. But even today, connectivity remains an important concern for policymakers, civil society, and many stakeholders, which is why this session is still very relevant. To discuss this important topic, we have 5 distinguished panelists from Africa and Europe. For the interest of time, I will only introduce them very, very briefly. I kindly ask you to visit the events page for the detailed bios. The first panelist is Hilary Cheserek, who is Technical Lead, Network Operations Center at KENET, the Kenyan Research and Education Network. Following Hilary, we will have Tuela Nyirenda Jere, who is Head Economic Integration, AUDA NEPAD. After Tuela, the next speaker is RT Holamani, Secretary General, Global Satellite Operators Association, GSOA. After RT, we'll have Ramon Roca from Diffie.net, followed by our last panelist, Lars Erik Forsberg, who is the Deputy Head of the International Cooperation Unit, DG Connect European Commission. I hope I didn't forget anyone. We'd like the session to be interactive, but at the same time manageable. Therefore, please ask your questions in the chat room. Someone will collect the questions and we will try to answer to as many questions as possible. Now, without further ado, I would like to start the session by asking Hilary the first question. Hilary, you are from Kenya, a country that has been held for been able to successfully connect a good part of its population. Can you talk a little bit about the achievement so far, and what was the contribution of your organization, KENET, in making sure that more and more Kenyans are connected? Thank you. Hilary, we can't hear you.
Hello, thank you so much. Now you can hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much, David, for that important question. And I'd like to appreciate all the panelists in here with us and all the attendees who've come in to listen to us. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. So to answer the question, so Kenya did a lot of work in the internet in the past. So it all started in around the year 1999 when the government recognized the internet as a tool of governance. And then it went ahead to make policies around the internet that would promote the use of internet for generally for the economy and for all social aspects of life. So, and then in 2008, it participated in the TEAMS project, which brought in undersea cable to the country. And then it opened up the market so that private sectors could also participate. So this one catalyzed activities in government, and also it catalyzed activities in the private sector. And now it was it just rolled on its own. All that came to increase in delivery, and internet coverage increased. So again in 2013, the government, through policies that did a lot of write-up For instance, in Kenya, we have an ICT master plan that was developed around 2013, 2014 there, which had 5 pillars in them, including digital skills, digital infrastructure, and information systems. So the digital skills was to develop the skill set required to develop the internet, basically to distribute fiber, all those things that needed to make sure that the internet is working. And this one worked a lot because that is now how we were able to get people who could run the internet. And then we build the infrastructure. The government built an OFB. And then there was space for the private sector to work. So they also built their own infrastructure. And with that, it catalyzed the internet internet setups, and it included, it made people to be digitally included. So, and then there were the digital information systems. You all know that in Kenya, we are using the internet most of the time for all the things. You've heard of M-Pesa in Kenya, and you've heard of all applications that run on the internet. So actually in Kenya, you will actually use the internet for everything, from mobile money, from paying for services in government. All of them are used in Kenya. So the other question that you also asked me is about what Kenneth has done. Kenneth is the National Research and Education Network. What Kenneth has done to extend the internet and to bring in digital inclusion. So as Kenneth, we have extended fiber to remote places where commercial operators cannot reach. There are some places, even in areas where you consider it that the network is covered, but there are small pockets of places with populations, and those ones have not been reached. And we as Kenneth have institutions in those locations who have to be reached. So we build a fiber to that location, and we build a mast, and then the commercial operators follow, and everybody there is connected. And sometimes even in those places that did not even mobile connectivity, starts getting mobile connectivity. In some places, we have to connect researchers in very remote areas. We have a case in Western Kenya, a place called Sankora, which is in a river, and they do research in fisheries. And because it's down in the river, signals don't get there. So Kenneth then comes in, and then we build the infrastructure to that location, and then we stimulate the activity around that place, and we are able to include people digitally. Also, we do teaching and learning. We try and we teach our faculty and members to use the internet to deliver content, and that way we promote inclusion. And even during the COVID-19 period, we organized with our other partners, and we were able to provide subsidized bundles to our students so that they can they are digitally included, and they're able to get content even while at home. They were learning online, and so that one, we did that program together. And we also bring together special interest groups, SIGs. For example, we have various members. We have the universities, the tertiary and vocational educations. We have also hospitals with us. So we group those people together because they have special needs, and then we are able to serve their needs. So I think I've tried to answer most of the questions that you've answered. And we've also had our own failures in our own system as Kenya. And maybe I could take time to explain some of them. For instance, in this country, we have an issue with taxation. Today in Kenya, we have 16...
Hilary, I think we'll come to those issues later so that we have time for everyone.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, yes.
History of building the internet infrastructure in Kenya is extraordinary. And many African countries have done considerable things in the last maybe 2 decades. And many people don't realize that just 15 years ago, less than 1% or 2% of Africans were connected. Today, yes, it's only a third of the population that are connected, but we have done tremendous success, and it is thanks to organizations such as yours. Thank you. So Hilary talked about what has been achieved so far, but there are many plans for the future. And one of the organizations that has important plans for Africa is AUDA-NEPAD, the African Union Development Agency. that Tuela represents. It would be nice to hear what are these plans and what the future promises. Tuela?
Thank you very much, David, and good afternoon, good evening to you and the fellow panelists, as well as those joining us online. So in terms of the ICT infrastructure on the continent, alongside other infrastructure sectors, this is largely governed by a framework that we call PIDA, which is the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, which covers ICT, energy, transport, and water. And this is implemented through a series of what we call priority action plans. So the first priority action plan was from 2012 until 2020, and we are now in the second priority action plan for implementation from 2021 to 2030. So as we embarked on elaborating this second priority action plan, we took stock in terms of what were the needs across the different sectors in terms of infrastructure. And for ICT, there were 4 very specific things that we found about the connectivity on the continent. The first one was the fact that there was very limited regional connectivity. So a lot of effort and work, as you rightly pointed out, has gone into national infrastructure in terms of upgrading the broadband networks within countries and improving the access to internet services in countries. But we found that across borders and across countries and across regions, that connectivity perhaps was not as good as it could have been and did not match the aspirations for regional integration for the continent. The second thing that we observed also was that there was still an inadequate level of implementation of data centers. And again, this has implications in terms of the quality and range of services that one can offer across the continent. A third related aspect had to do with internet exchange points. At the time that this assessment was being done, I think 32 countries had operational IXPs, still not enough in terms of being able to meet the needs of the continent. And then lastly, what we also found was that there was still a lot of untapped opportunities in terms of using what we would call alternative infrastructure. So how could we leverage other infrastructure to provide ICT services, for instance, using power line carrier technology and other means as well. So based off of that, in the criteria that were then used to identify which projects could form the portfolio for transboundary ICT across the continent, 2 things came up as far as the criteria. The first one was that the projects that were going to be selected, regardless of which sector they were, whether it was the ICT sector itself, water, transport, or energy, had to be projects that demonstrated, to the extent possible, the use of smart and innovative technologies. The second thing that was decided upon by the member states was to follow what we call an integrated corridor approach. So to look at the development of infrastructure across corridors, but also looking at how do you integrate across the different infrastructure sectors. And for ICT, this is particularly important because what we want to see is the integration of digitalization in the different sectors. So whether we're doing transport, whether we're doing energy, whether we're doing water, we want to make sure that we are able to actually integrate digitalization and digital services and the use of digital technologies in those sectors. So this is where we are now in terms of the integrated corridor approach. The projects were identified and prioritized. There are a total of 69 projects in the entire portfolio, cross-section of those being in the ICT sector, specifically 11 projects, which are regional infrastructure projects in ICT, covering 3 very specific issues. One is the terrestrial connectivity between countries. The second one is data centers. And then lastly, IXPs. So these are projects that member states have put forward as projects that they would like to see implemented towards the attainment of regional integration, which we also understand is very critical in terms of the AFCFTA and other imperatives as well. So maybe I stop there for now, and then perhaps I can elaborate in the next iteration.
Thank you, Tuela. This is very interesting, and I hope we'll see many of the plans being implemented in the coming years. Next is Ramon Roca. He's from Giphy.net. which is in Spain, where we think it's Europe. It should be connected, and connectivity should not be an issue. Can you say why do we need organizations like you, who is trying to connect people using non-traditional ways while you are in Europe? And can this be used elsewhere, like in Africa, or is something very particular to your region? Thank you.
Yes, good question. Thanks for it, and also it was great to be after Hillary and Tuwela, because they already pointed how important is the infrastructure, and also as you pointed, when thinking on Europe, seems that everybody is already connected and we have lots of infrastructure. But let me show you, and I move the camera where I am. I'm in the countryside. I'm in a farm, so there is no city around here, right? And even in Europe, you will realize that, and despite supposedly there is lots of infrastructures, there is places, maybe not many and in percentage as in Africa, of places where you don't have internet, and we still have people to connect. Maybe not many, but there is still. And typically, that happens because of two reasons. Because if you live in the nowhere in the land, and you are an agricultural family or something, there is no dense population there, so there is no interest for the companies going there. And also there is another barrier, which is the incomings. I mean, maybe there are people who cannot afford the access, and that's very important, because to make internet happen, everybody understands that the good thing on the internet is that it's not belonging to a single private interest or a single country. It's the network for all of us. It's the network of networks, right? But when you look from the citizen perspective, how do you access to the internet? And that's the big point. And supposedly, you access through an internet service provider, is everybody known, and typically is an entity that, and probably is why you are saying the traditional way to access the internet, right? It's through an internet service provider, which is a commercial, let's say, entity. And maybe those commercial entities are not interested in connecting people who don't have money, and that's one of the points, or in places when there is no many people, because there is no business there. There is no interest in going there. And so what we do, from him being farmers in the countryside that we are living, is doing the access by ourselves. And I think that could be very much normalized, instead of just not only the traditional way being in the commercial access, because it's the only way to solve that problem on the access. Because Hillary was explaining very well, and also in the previous panels, how important is the infrastructure. But then the infrastructure has to reach the people. So we have to bridge those barriers. And what we do in organizations like Gifinet, and hopefully inspire others, and I'm sure that could be, is not a problem only in Europe, in the agricultural areas and in the landscape, also in every is a world problem. People who don't have money, or who are living in a very low dense population areas, they still have to have the right for accessing internet and to have the same opportunities. So maybe we have to find other ways, like community networks, and empowering the people from getting the access by themselves, and sharing access, and these kind of things that probably, if it's only driven by commercial interests, I mean, commercial interests, maybe they are not interested in people sharing the access on the internet. But we as a citizens might have that need for getting the access. So makes sense to create the governance and enable the communities for building the access, and not rely only on with a few, commercial or interest that maybe could be interested or not. Is in the interest to have to be the interest for all of us. And I feel also somehow responsible on that. And it's not only about being connected in Europe or in some countries. Everybody in the world should have access, and an organization like us, I think, it can play a role in providing that access to everyone.
Thank you, Ramon. This is a very important point, I think, to to go to the next speaker, because as you rightly said, even in developed economies, let alone Africa, there are people who are not interesting for commercial operators for various reasons. And today, internet is not luxury. Internet means being part of the general population. If I don't have internet, I can't work. I can't. We have seen it with COVID. I can't study if I don't have the internet. So it is important, and no one should be left out of the internet. And even as you said, the numbers in Europe might be small, but they are citizens. They have rights, and it is important that they are connected. And in Africa, this is not even a small portion of the population. It is a large portion of the population. In my country, 80% of the population is rural, and most often in scarcely populated areas. So it is important that they are connected as much as I am. I am in a big city. I don't have a lot of communication problems, but there are many Ethiopians that have. The next speaker is Arti Holamaini. I'm sorry if I didn't say your name correctly. You come from the satellite world. And today, we don't talk that much about satellite. Fiber is the king. Is satellite still relevant, especially in Africa? And tell us why.
Thank you so much, David. It's a pleasure to be here and share with you about the satellite perspective. Absolutely, satellite operators are really proud to be an integral component of Africa's rapidly expanding telecoms infrastructure. Today, our broadcast services are responding to the diverse languages and cultures which are embedded on the African continent. Our IoT services are responding to environmental monitoring needs like shrinking lakes, like Lake Chad, or sustainable agriculture. Our broadband services are enabling education for children across the continent, including a focus, for example, on marginalized girls. They enable citizens to participate in democratic elections. They're enabling communications about the movement of swarms of locusts, for example, that risk devastating crops. They're allowing rural nurses to be trained to support isolated communities, and they are powering ATMs and money transfer services to enable digital financial inclusion. Without satellite, there would be no mobile communications or Wi-Fi access for millions of people in Africa because we provide their backhaul. So satellite services really are at the heart of sustainable development for Africa, as evidenced by the 44 communication satellites that serve Africa today and the 20 African countries who have actually embarked on space programs. You said that fiber is king, especially in Africa. I would humbly and respectfully change that to especially not in Africa. Of course, you have 37 African countries with submarine cables landing on their coastlines, but in reality, 45% of the African population lives more than 10 kilometers away from a fiber node. And you still have 16 landlocked countries that don't have fiber at all, and they rely on wireless solutions. According to GSMA, Sub-Saharan Africa has the widest coverage gap in the world. Only 26% of Africans had mobile connectivity in 2020. Now, when we think about fiber, the World Bank thinks that 500,000 kilometers of fiber is required to give universal connectivity in Africa. The Broadband Commission from the UN thinks it's half of that, but whether it's 500,000 or 250,000, the bill still amounts to much more than $100 billion to connect Africa by 2030 if you use land-based technologies alone. That's neither viable, it's not realistic, and the COVID experience really drove home this point. Vera Songway, the UN Under-Secretary General, she said last year, we need broadband faster, cheaper, and expanded to the last mile of our populations. And I think for me, that really sums it up. Fiber is never going to be a scalable solution for rural Africa, and this is clear. We've also heard about fixed wireless access. And fixed wireless access, of course, has the potential to provide fixed access in areas where fiber is not available. And it can connect lots of users by doing so. That's what Rain Networks is doing in South Africa. But when you look closely, you see that they're only doing it in certain metropolitan areas because it's difficult and costly to extend FWA outside of the urban areas. It still requires a connection to the backbone. If you want to extend connectivity, you do require backhaul like satellite, but in reality, if you're going to do backhaul, it's going to make more sense to backhaul mobile or community Wi-Fi so that citizens can have connectivity on the move and not just in fixed locations, which is the case with FWA. I just want to come back briefly to the point of resilience, and I had shared a slide. I don't know if the technical support can show the image. That would be great. Not only is Africa a vast landmass with 1.2 billion population, but it is also a continent that is frequently facing the brunt of climate change events, whether it's droughts or floods or cyclones. Fixed infrastructure is not easy to put in place across such a big continent, and the infrastructure which is in place is often affected. It could be destroyed, damaged, or even stolen. And so this highlights the relevance of satellite more than ever. And on this slide, you can see what the Mozambique regulator said, speaking at an ITU event after Cyclone Idai in 2019. He said it was a mistake to phase out satellite just because fiber arrived. So clearly fiber is not king, certainly not for Africa. Thank you for sharing the slide. You can stop sharing. I'm going to close by just saying that GSOA is working with Smart Africa to help foster a greater understanding of how African countries can get the most out of satellite communications. But this is critical for Europe too, and it goes directly to the issue of European security and economic stability. Africa is an important origin of migrants and asylum seekers in Europe. And by providing greater support for satellite communications for Africa, the EU and the Commission can really address some of the root causes of this migration. SATCOM supports the creation of economic opportunity because they can connect where other technologies cannot. Yeah, and by doing so, they significantly improve the chances for low-income families to break the cycle of poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, RT, for the compelling arguments for satellites. I agree we need to have not just one technology, but several technologies that complement each other so that we can connect everyone. Last but not least, Lars Erik Forsberg from the European Commission. How can Europe work with Africa to connect the unconnected in Africa? But is there also something that Africa can contribute to Europe? Is there a two-way cooperation, or is it just a one-way cooperation? Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you for inviting me to this seminar. Now, basically, of course, there's a two-way, and absolutely, you know, this is a peer-to-peer relationship that we have with Africa today. Both are dependent on one another. But just starting first of all on the first question, because you actually have asked two questions now. How can Europe support to connect the unconnected? And I think this is the right moment. We have had a lot of discussions between Africa and the European Union, so the African Union, the European Union, but also, of course, other stakeholders like Smart Africa, GSMA, ITU, etc., etc. We, as you remember, we had this digital economy task force, which was actually studying some of these questions relatively profoundly. And after that, Africa and the African Union came up with its own digital transformation strategy, which I think has a lot of commonalities with that report. And at the same time, of course, we should not forget that Africa has its own PIDA, which is obviously supported by the European Union, the way that Africa wants connectivity to be developed on the continent. Now, this was a lot of talking, if I may say so, a lot of papers, and I know that a lot of Africans were irritated that, so when do we get to do these things? And I think it's the right moment to say this is the moment that we are going to start, because now the European Union has a new financial framework. We have a new Global Europe program. We have the Gateway, which is a product of this new program. So all of a sudden, the European Union has decided, which was not the previous case, that there is in our financial cooperation with Africa quite a lot of funds to support connectivity in Africa. So that's one thing that I wanted to mention. I mean, the Gateway talks about 300 billion, 10% should go to digital. So there we go. There's an envelope that we should work on together with Africa. Now, I go back to the issue about connectivity. Of course, the first and the second mile is something where there's a lot of interest from industry, and we of course are going to work with industry too on that connectivity. On the last mile, of course, this is the big issue, and there, of course, we already mentioned that satellite is one of the opportunities to work together. There is also, of course, other means. We would like to work, what I say, technology neutral, in the sense that we take the best technology whenever we are rolling out connectivity to the last mile. I think it's also important, and that was stressed sometimes, is the fact that this has to be also a cooperation between private and public sector. So we have to work together with all the good companies in Africa and in the European Union to actually do this last mile. We need new business strategies, basically, to reach out to the last mile of the unconnected. There's also other things that I wanted to say in how we would work. Of course, I'm very inspired by one of the persons that were one of the groups that was with us as this task force was the Alliance for Affordable Internet. I mean, I think it's not only a question of connecting, but it's also a question of having meaningful connectivity that the Alliance is now talking about. First of all, it's affordability. Definitely, people in remote areas should be able to afford to connect. So that is a very important matter for us. But there are also other things for meaningful connectivity. They should have enough data, of course, to be able to do it. Devices should be, affordable for people in remote areas. So this is something which I think we share a lot. There's another aspect which is very important for the European Union, and I think also for the Africans, because I've heard it before, and that is that connectivity is not only inclusive, but it's also secure, resilient, and it is trustworthy for the end user. That is something which we are going to emphasize a lot in our cooperation with Africa in the future. This is an important issue for both continents. Now, you asked me one other question, which was how can Europe learn from Africa, and what can Africa actually support Europe with? Now, of course, there's one thing that always brings into my mind, and that is the innovative youth that is in Africa, and the startups, the way that people are actually working and has a mind of finding entrepreneurship something very interesting. Yesterday I was in another meeting on artificial intelligence and women, and somebody said at that meeting that the place in the world where there is most women working in tech and in startups is Ghana. And the European figures is about half of that. So definitely African women can learn a lot to European women to get started a little bit more into the ICT sector. Excuse any European woman that is here, but I think that is really one of the issues. Another issue which is obviously comes to connectivity is to keep internet open and unfragmented, and not only secure, but that we have one internet in the world. That I think is something that the organization is very much on the top of. But I think we are reaching a stage now with everything that is happening around us, particularly here in Europe, where basically a country has aggressed another one, is closing off itself from the rest of the world. I mean, this is a question about democracy, not only in Europe, but it's also in Africa. So please join us and the other ones in Africa to protect and to defend an open internet, because that is really something that is really important. Another issue, of course, we are very close to one another. We are just north of this huge continent that we have next to us. So for us, it is really important that cybersecurity is addressed in Africa, because of course the interconnectivity between us and Africa is going to be developed and is going to be more and more. And I don't say that we are perfect in our cybersecurity, but I do think that this is a matter that Africans will have to take very seriously in the future. And I'm going back to, for instance, issues like resilience, but I'm also talking about mitigating risks in networks in Africa, which is a top priority. I mean, you should work and you should see to it that Africa, first of all, is for Africans and not for the rest of us. And that definitely a secure and a system where risks are mitigated is really, really important. Of course, it's easy to say for me here, we were talking about reaching out to the last mile, and of course there are priorities which are different sometimes, but this is an issue which we should never forget about in the end of the day. I stop at that, and thank you very much for allowing me to be here with you today.
Thanks very much, Lars Erik. I think it's important to know that Europe is really trying to work with Africa to make sure that more people are connected. And it's also good to know that the cooperation will be more bilateral, well, two-way in the future, I hope at least, than the past. You rightly mentioned that Africans are innovative, and we have seen it. All the data shows that there is more and more innovation coming from Africa, and I hope that it will continue like that. But for that, we need to have an internet, as you said, that is secure, that is global, that is connected. And yes, it's good to have connectivity, but we have also to make sure that the internet remains the internet that we like. We don't want a fragmented internet, because it really, closes the opportunities that we have had until now. We have a number of questions and comments. Well, I would appreciate if Maxim or David, if you can help me with identifying the most critical ones. Let me just take one that I have found here. It looks that many of us are convinced that the digital connectivity is a basic need, just like access to electricity and clean water. Maybe one of the questions is who is going to pay the infrastructure building as well as services providing in the end. Even we can optimize the technology choices, someone will have to pay. And it's the state, the local community, individual users, or whatever. So who needs to pay for that? As Ramon said, sometimes the local populations cannot afford it, especially in rural areas. It's more costly in those areas because the population is sparsely, located. At the same time, those people generally have lower revenues. So whose responsibility is it to pay for the infrastructure. I think I will leave it open to anyone who is interested to answer to that question.
Maybe let me have a
Tuwela and then Arti.
So maybe just one or two things to say. Number one, I mean, I think that clearly, yes, somebody has to pay for it, and on different levels. You know, when we talk about investing into the infrastructure, we have to be able to look at some kind of collaboration and partnering between our local private sector and governments in terms of being able to actually bring these services to bear. If we all agree that access to internet is fundamental and is almost even a right, I think some states have actually gone that far as to say it's a right, then we have to develop as governments models that enable us to provide a minimum level of service to our citizens. And that has to be factored into the national planning, into national budgets, and should be able to be provided in the same way that we provide minimum levels of services, for instance, in terms of health, education, access to water, etc. So I think that we have to think through sustainable models of how we will actually provide a minimum level of service in terms of internet access and connectivity for everybody on the continent. I want to just turn a little bit to you know, what Lars said, and to reassure you, Lars, that we are taking cybersecurity very, very seriously. I'm actually at the moment in a meeting in Ghana, which you have also cited as being very progressive in terms of its ICT development, where we have a community of African cyber experts that has been established through a partnership with the GFCE, and looking very carefully at issues of cyber expertise, cyber capacity building, with a strong emphasis on cybersecurity, because we recognize the fact that securing our infrastructure is paramount in terms of our development, but also if we are going to be talking about trade, whether within the continent or with Europe, we have to make sure that our services are up to scratch and can actually match the standards required in terms of cybersecurity. And then lastly, in that same regard, because we have talked about the importance, I think, of inclusiveness and making sure that women are adequately represented, we are also launching a network of African women in cyber security, which is in the formative stages and would be launched later this year, to make sure that also that our planning is gender responsive and does take into account the peculiar needs of women on the continent as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Tuwela. Arti?
Thank you very much. Yes, I just wanted to make the point that, you know, it's a big question, who's going to pay for the infrastructure? Satellite infrastructure is already in place, of course. You don't actually need to pay for it in the same way, but the question of cost is still there. And I think we really need to get very pragmatic on how we attack this. There are many opportunities, a lot of funding that goes into supporting Africa, but one of the issues that we find is regulatory burdens in terms of disproportionate import fees or disproportionate license fees, which ultimately either prevent the rollout of these services, or if companies do embrace them, will wind up passing those costs on to the consumer. So I think a lot needs to be done also on the regulatory front to make it easier to provide services in certain countries in Africa. Thank you.
Arti, I think you can continue and answer to the question on Starlink. Maybe you can say it. Well.
Sure. So today, indeed, as has been pointed out on the chat, Starlink is not at a price point where it can realistically enable very low-income families to embrace it and make use of it. The availability is also not there fully yet. It is emerging. But what I would say is Africa is definitely ready to embrace satellite broadband systems, and they have been there already for many years. I think there is a lack of information on how they are used, where they are used, and the fact that they are used so much, in fact, tells you that cost is not necessarily a barrier. 250 schools connected across Kenya, focus on marginalized girls. It's not the low-income families who are paying for that. This is thanks to partnership between government, local providers, and European operators. Thank you.
Thank you, Arti. As you rightly said, it's satellites continue to connect many people, and we've seen that the satellite industry is innovative. We see that there are new solutions that can be even more interesting. So let's continue to listen at least to what is happening in the satellite world. The next question I see here is for Hillary. Hillary said that they use the internet in Kenya for everything. What are his views and the other panelists about the harms of internet shutdown? So unfortunately, Africa is one of the continents where we have a lot of internet shutdowns. According to the statistics that we can find in many sites, including internet societies. So what do you think of internet shutdowns?
Thank you so much for that question from one of the person asking. Of course, like it said before, internet is a basic need. And so if you shut down the internet, it's just like you shut down water in some cases. So unfortunately, we have those problems in Africa, and they need to be addressed. Fortunately, in my country, the internet is open, and there's considerable amount of freedom of speech that you can use. And so long as what you're doing on the internet is not illegal, it works fine. But we've had on other countries in Kenya where internet is either blocked or it is censored and all that, and that is not a good thing. So people should continue advocating for a free and open internet for everybody as a tool of development. And the internet is basically an infrastructure which many other things can run on top of it. And so it's important that the policies that are made are able to promote that. Otherwise, it might not get meaningful use. Thank you so much. I think I've answered to the best of my ability.
Thank you. Anyone would like to say something about it?
I don't want to introduce. I don't want to talk about European problems, but it is the problem right now. Of course, what is happening in Ukraine and Russia is just a very, very flagrant idea on how important the internet is to provide people with the truth. I mean, and I think it's a very basic democratic right that we don't shut down the internet and that we actually keep it open. And I must say that I am a bit shaken by the fact that we have had to also close down not the whole internet, but parts of the internet, parts of the sites, which has been overflooding Europe with propaganda. So there you go. I mean, take us an example and learn from Europe, from this side also, because we are not at all more or less vulnerable than Africa in this respect. Keep internet open, free. That's really our most important message here today.
Thank you. Yes, you're right. Sometimes we think that, well, this wouldn't happen somewhere. Well, there are things that we wouldn't expect to happen in the US that happened in the last few years. The same thing in Europe. So it's true that there were too many of internet shutdown in Africa and other restrictions, but unfortunately it's also a worldwide phenomenon, and it had an impact on people's lives, because I don't know if there is any other question, but while waiting for another question, I can I can tell a story, a personal story that happened a few years back. There was an internet shutdown in Ethiopia, and I was in Kenya, and someone called me and told me, well, there is an important medicine that you have to buy for me and you don't find it, we don't find it in Ethiopia, please send it to me. But I had to have a prescription from that person, and I couldn't get it because he couldn't send me by internet. So this is a personal story that showed me that, you know, there are many people who suffer. You know, sometimes it is a life and death issue. So yeah, it is important that governments and other parties make sure that they keep the internet on, even in difficult situations. Hilary?
Yes, I'd like to add something on what you've said. You've just talked of prescription, and I remembered we also have hospitals in our connections, and they also send things like scans and all that for analysis by other doctors outside their territory. And so if you shut down such an important tool, it should be seen as a critical infrastructure to be protected by everybody. So if, for instance, you can get a prescription for your medicine, that's a human right that you need. And if someone shuts it down, it's a cause for worry. So I second you on that idea. And then just to go back to what Lars had said before about freedom of the internet, like the situations in Ukraine, the internet is basically an infrastructure, just like the road that we have. And in the road, you have also people who are bad, and we have good people. So you have to kind of form a police of some sort of to check also on other issues that are there. So in as much as there's freedom, that freedom should be local. It has to include all the details, and countries need to come up with policies for that. For example, you need to have a cybersecurity policy, and I'm sure even in Europe you have the data protection policy should be there, and all those policies needs to be in place to protect the internet and to make it work as it's required. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is a question about about drones. How can we use drones to deliver blood in village if the internet is bad? How dare you? Well, I'm not an expert in drones, so I don't know if they really use the internet. But I don't know if someone can answer to that. Hilary, you seem to
Yes,
be
I'm
knowledgeable.
not an expert. I'm not an expert in drones as well, but we had a case study in Kenya. I would call them drones. There was a balloon project by Google. All right, and in northern Kenya, the dry lands, just the border with Ethiopia, my neighbor Bekele is here. We used drones to connect the unconnected people. So they were flying at about 60,000 feet, 57,000 feet, and they would beam 4G connectivity down to the hut. So yes, you're right. It could be, if you can find a sustainable way to let the drone stay in the air for long in a very remote area, it could finally work. But it hasn't been tested yet that much, and that project actually was cancelled eventually. But it's some form of one way of trying. It just needs some testing. Thank you. Maybe someone else can.
Thank you. I think we are almost at the end of the session. Is there any burning comment that you might have before we end the session? Arti.
You know, I was in an event recently where a mobile operator said, we can go to the moon, we can go to Mars even, but we can't bridge the digital divide. And for me, his comment spoke volumes. And he said, you know, everybody says it's a question of spectrum, and it's not a question of spectrum. It's a question of economics, goodwill, and policy. And I think it's a valuable thing to remember. We can do this. It needs the right policy. It needs governments and policymakers to really take a very holistic view and not pick winners amongst technologies, and look carefully at their regulatory regimes to make sure they're facilitating the environment for all technologies. Thank you.
I would like to just say that for me, this meeting is a crucial meeting for the European Union and for Africa and the cooperation between us, because we are in the context of the hub. This is making the discussion so much more richer for us to build this hub, because we need industry, we need academia, we need civil society with governments to build this partnership between Africa and the European Union. And we really need the African side, but we also need, of course, the European side to be present, to express your views so that we can get this partnership right. Because what I said in the beginning, this is peer-to-peer. It's not about Europe only supporting Africa, but Africa is also supporting Europe here. So thanks a lot for being here. I mean, this is probably you, David, just going to end this, but I just wanted to take the opportunity to say that how important we see in Europe that this is actually taking place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really couldn't agree more with both of you. The technology is here. It's just a question of whether we want to, spend the effort, the money to connect everyone. I personally believe that everyone needs to be connected. Otherwise, we are going to create marginalized societies, and that is never a good thing. And with regards to the partnership with Europe, I hope that the future of our partnership will be a partnership of equals. Africans have many things to contribute, especially in innovation. We have a very young population that are passionate, that can really change the world. And I hope that the decades to come will be a decade where we'll see the next Facebooks and so on coming from Africa, and where everybody around the world will benefit from this innovation. I think I will stop it here. I think the organizers don't want me to go past the hour. I would like to thank you so much for the very powerful, interventions that you have had. I am sure everybody benefited from your insights that are diverse and profound. Thank you very much, and have a good day.